The greatest Christmas gift Dean Martin ever gave wasn't wrapped in gold paper or tied with silk ribbons. It was delivered live to 20 million American families on December 25, 1965, through the lens of NBC cameras in Studio 6B. But it wasn't a song or a duet with his best friend Frank Sinatra. It was a single word, spoken with the quiet authority of a man who understood that some principles were worth more than any paycheck. That word was no. And when Frank Sinatra heard it, he knew exactly what Dean meant. Two brothers were about to take on the network together. Studio 6B at NBC's Rockefeller Center hummed with the nervous energy of live television on Christmas night. The Tonight Show stage, normally Johnny Carson's domain, had been transformed for the holiday special. Garland draped the host's desk. A magnificent Christmas tree stood stage right, its lights twinkling like distant stars. Red velvet curtains hung heavy with tradition, while cameras rolled on tracks polished to mirror shine. The air was thick with cigarette smoke and electrical tension of live broadcast. Stagehands moved with practiced urgency, adjusting lights that cast everything in warm glow of manufactured Christmas cheer. This wasn't just another variety show. This was prime time on America's most sacred night, when families gathered around television sets like electronic hearths, seeking comfort in shared entertainment. But beneath festive decorations and orchestral arrangements, something darker was brewing. Corporate calculation that turned Christmas into commodity, measuring human dignity in Nielsen ratings and advertising revenue. Dean Martin stood in the host position, immaculate in his black tuxedo, a red carnation, his only concession to the holiday. Beside him, Frank Sinatra adjusted his bow tie, preparing for their duet segment. At 48 and 50 respectively, Dean and Frank had reached entertainment's pinnacle. Their Rat Pack partnership dominated Las Vegas. Their friendship was legendary, and tonight they were co-hosting Christmas for America. But filling in for Johnny Carson, who was spending Christmas with family in Nebraska, they were operating in someone else's kingdom. NBC belonged to men who viewed Christmas as the ultimate marketing opportunity. Men who saw 20 million viewers as 20 million potential customers, willing to cross any line to keep them entertained. Christmas 1965 was complicated in America. The country was caught between early 60s optimism and approaching turmoil. Vietnam escalated while civil rights struggled forward. For most Americans, Christmas remained sanctuary from complications. NBC understood this hunger for innocence, prepared to exploit it ruthlessly. The network had assembled stellar lineup for the Christmas special. Dean and Frank would co-host with their legendary chemistry. Judy Garland would sing carols. Red Skelton would perform beloved characters. The Rockettes would dance. It was designed as nostalgic celebration of traditional American values, programming that made advertisers reach for checkbooks. But there was one guest who didn't fit NBC's wholesome image. Tommy Nakamura was a 23-year-old Japanese-American comedian from Los Angeles, rising star discovered performing at San Francisco's Hungry Eye. Tommy was brilliant, sharp, utterly fearless in addressing racial tensions most entertainers avoided. His material about growing up in internment camps during World War II was hilarious and heartbreaking, delivered with honesty that made audiences uncomfortable and enlightened. NBC had booked Tommy for one reason: to humiliate him. The plan, conceived in sterile conference rooms, was simple and cruel. Tommy would perform under pretense of showcase, but Dean would be instructed to engage him in comedy banter, exposing him as nervous, untalented amateur, unsuited for national television. Executives had prepared specific lines for Dean to deliver: questions about Pearl Harbor, jokes about karate and soy sauce, references to the enemy that would reduce Tommy to racial stereotype, sending clear message that some people didn't belong on American television screens during sacred holidays. The plan was Maxwell Thornton's brainchild, NBC's senior vice president of programming, a thin man with calculating eyes measuring success in demographic points and advertising dollars. Thornton represented new breed television executives, men who'd never performed but wielded absolute power over those who did. He viewed entertainers as products to market, audiences as consumers to manipulate, controversy as strategic tool. Thornton arrived at Studio 6B an hour before airtime, accompanied by junior executives nodding at every word like trained seals. he found Dean and Frank in their shared dressing room, reviewing the script. "Gentlemen," Thornton said, false warmth coating his voice, "just wanted to review tonight's rundown, particularly the segment with our young Japanese friend." Dean looked up neutrally. "Tommy Nakamura. Read through his material. Kid's funny. Really funny." Frank, adjusting his cufflinks, added, "Sharp kid. Reminds me of young comics we saw coming up." Thornton's smile tightened. "Well, that's why we need caution. We don't want him overwhelming our Christmas audience with challenging material, so we've prepared alternative approaches." He handed Dean index cards containing prepared questions and jokes. Dean read slowly, face showing no emotion. Frank leaned over, scanning the cards, his expression darkening. "This is what you want me to ask him." Dean's voice was perfectly calm. "It's just comedy. Good clean fun for Christmas night. Light ethnic humor our audience will appreciate." Frank set down his drink hard. "Ethnic humor? You mean racist jokes?" Thornton's mask slipped momentarily. "Frank, please, Dean, we're paying you both $250,000 tonight. NBC has promoted your records, movies, shows. We're asking you help give advertisers Christmas programming they expect." The threat hung like cigarette smoke. Play along or face consequences extending beyond tonight. Few performers risked livelihoods for principle, but Dean Martin and Frank Sinatra weren't most performers. They'd been born poor Italian Americans where dignity couldn't be bought, only chosen or abandoned. They'd spent decades watching talented people destroyed by executives viewing humans as expendable resources. "I see," Dean said simply. "Let me think about it." Frank stood up, ice blue eyes fixed on Thornton. "There's nothing to think about. We're not doing this. Frank, please don't be hasty." "Hasty?" Frank's voice carried dangerous edge. "You want us to destroy a kid on Christmas night for what? Ratings." Dean remained seated, studying the cards. "Max, what happens if we don't use these questions?" Thornton's friendliness vanished completely. "Then you'll both find yourselves with very different career prospects. NBC has long memory, gentlemen." Frank stepped closer to Thornton. "And so does Frank Sinatra. You threatening us, Max?" Dean stood, placing calming hand on Frank's shoulder. "Easy, Francis." He looked at Thornton. "We understand the situation perfectly." Thornton, satisfied he'd established control, smiled. "Excellent. Show starts in 30 minutes. Break legs out there." After Thornton left, Frank exploded. "That son of a bitch. Who does he think he is?" Dean sat quietly, still holding the index cards. He could hear orchestra warming up, feel pre-show energy building. In minutes, they'd face 20 million Americans, inviting them into homes on Christmas night. "What do you want to do, Dino?" Frank asked, using Dean's old nick. Dean Martin looked at the cards one more time, then tore them in half. "We're going to treat that kid with respect." Frank grinned, that dangerous Sinatra smile. "That's my pal." The Tonight Show Christmas special went live at 9 p.m. Eastern. Dean's opening monologue was flawless, delivered with effortless charm. He joked about Christmas shopping, golf games, assembling toys. Frank joined for witty banter that had studio audience laughing. Genuinely, 20 million families settled into living rooms as everything appeared perfectly planned. Judy Garland performed Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas with emotional authenticity only she possessed. Red Skelton delighted children and adults with pantomime routines. The Rockettes kicked with military precision, sequined costumes catching studio lights. Then came Tommy Nakamura's moment. Dean introduced him warmly, describing him as one of America's brightest young comedians, setting tone of respect and anticipation. Frank nodded approvingly from his chair. Tommy walked on stage to polite applause, carrying himself with nervous confidence of performer knowing he belonged but uncertain if audience would agree. In the control room, Maxwell Thornton leaned forward intensely, watching monitors like general observing battlefield. Assistants flanked him, clipboards ready to document whatever determined whether Dean Martin and Frank Sinatra's NBC careers would continue. Tommy began his routine. Within 30 seconds, it was clear he was everything Dean claimed. Funny, sharp, intelligent, completely commanding the stage. His material was clean but edged with social observation, marking the best comedians. He discussed being the only Asian kid in high school, his grandmother's attempts understanding American culture, absurdity of racial stereotypes. Studio audience laughed, genuinely, not polite chuckles greeting unfamiliar performers. Tommy won them with pure talent. In the control room, Thornton's expression darkened with each successful laugh line. After 5 minutes, Tommy finished to enthusiastic applause. He moved toward guest chair beside Dean's desk, where real test would begin. This was when Dean was supposed to deploy Thornton's prepared questions, when young comedian would be revealed as inferior performer NBC executives believed him to be. Dean looked at Tommy, then studio audience, then directly into camera 2, carrying his image to 20 million homes. When he spoke, his voice carried easy confidence, defining his career. "Tommy, that was terrific. You're going to be a big star." Dean paused. In that pause, American television's trajectory shifted. "I know our producers prepared questions for me, but honestly, I think they're stupid questions. So instead, I want to ask you something real." In the control room, Thornton's face went white. Assistants looked at each other, panicked. This wasn't scripted. This wasn't paid for. Frank leaned forward in his chair, smile spreading across his face. He knew exactly what Dean was doing. "Tommy," Dean continued warmly, "what's it like being a young comedian in America today? What do you want to say people maybe haven't heard before?" Simple question that changed everything. Instead of humiliation setup, Tommy was invited to share authentic perspective with his career's largest audience. His response was thoughtful, funny, deeply human. He talked about growing up between cultures, finding humor in adversity, responsibility that came with making people laugh. Dean listened with attention, making great interviewers great, asking follow-ups, drawing out Tommy's intelligence and humanity. Frank occasionally chimed in with supportive comments, creating atmosphere of genuine acceptance. For 15 minutes, America watched 3 talented men having genuine conversation about art, identity, and comedy's power bridging differences. It was, by any measure, great television. Programming elevating the medium beyond entertainment into something approaching art. But it wasn't what NBC ordered, and Maxwell Thornton tolerated no insubordination. During commercial break, Thornton's voice crackled through both their earpieces. "What the hell are you doing? You're supposed to be asking about Pearl Harbor, not platform social commentary." Dean reached up and removed his earpiece, handing it to a stagehand. Frank did the same, winking at Dean. For the remainder, they operated without control room direction, trusting instincts and decades of experience. The Christmas special proceeded beautifully. Dean and Frank's interactions with every guest were warm, respectful, genuinely entertaining. They performed Silent Night as a duet, bringing tears to viewers' eyes. Dean closed with heartfelt message about treating every person with dignity and respect, not just during holidays but throughout the year. Frank added, "That's what Christmas really means, folks. Peace on earth, goodwill toward all men." When cameras stopped rolling, studio audience gave standing ovation lasting nearly 5 minutes. Cast and crew approached throughout the evening, expressing admiration. Tommy Nakamura, tears in his eyes, thanked both men for giving him opportunity to be seen as full human being, rather than caricature. Maxwell Thornton was not applauding. The confrontation came 30 minutes after show ended. Thornton entered their dressing room without knocking, face flushed with anger, executive composure finally cracking. "You just cost this network millions of dollars," Thornton said, voice shaking with rage. "Our sponsors wanted traditional Christmas entertainment, not sociology lecture from internment camp kid." Dean was removing makeup with cold cream, meeting Thornton's eyes in mirror. "Kid's name is Tommy Nakamura, and he's more talented than half the people you put on air." Frank stood from his chair, "and a hell of a lot more decent than some executives I know. Point is, you deliberately violated contracts by refusing agreed-upon format." Dean turned around, facing Thornton directly. When he spoke, his voice carried quiet authority, making him one of entertainment's most respected men. "Max, let me explain something. I'm not your employee. I'm not your puppet. I'm Dean Martin, and Dean Martin doesn't humiliate people for your amusement, especially not on Christmas night. Neither does Frank Sinatra," Frank added, stepping beside Dean. "You're both finished at NBC, Thornton spat. "I'll make sure you never work for this network again." Dean smiled without warmth. "Max, I've got news. I don't need NBC. NBC needs me." He looked at Frank. "Needs us." Frank nodded. "Plenty of other networks in this town, Max, and they all remember who brings in ratings." Dean walked past Thornton toward door, then turned back. "Oh, and Max, Merry Christmas." Frank followed, pausing at door. "Yeah, Max. Peace on earth, goodwill toward men. Look it up." The aftermath was immediate and dramatic. NBC received over 10,000 calls within 24 hours. To Thornton's shock, they were overwhelmingly positive. Viewers praised Dean and Frank for their warmth, professionalism, and treatment of Tommy Nakamura. Major newspapers ran editorials celebrating the show as television at its best. Tommy Nakamura's career launched that night. Within 6 months, he had his own variety show on competing network. Within 2 years, he was selling out comedy clubs and recording successful albums. He would later say Dean Martin and Frank Sinatra's kindness on Christmas night 1965 was his professional life's most important moment. Maxwell Thornton found his NBC position increasingly precarious. Network executives, reading overwhelmingly positive reaction, questioned his programming judgment. He was quietly reassigned to lesser role, eventually leaving television altogether. Dean Martin and Frank Sinatra never worked for NBC again, not because they were blacklisted, but because they chose not to. They had proven entertainers with enough star power and personal integrity could operate outside traditional network television power structures. Other performers took note, and television's landscape began shifting toward greater creative independence. Years later, Tommy Nakamura visited Dean at his Beverly Hills home. Frank was there too, and they sat by the pool talking about comedy, courage, and responsibility that came with fame. "I never properly thanked you both for what you did that night," Tommy said. Dean shrugged characteristically. "You didn't need to thank us. You just needed to be yourself. That was enough." Frank leaned forward. "Kid, let me tell you something. In this business, you either stand up for what's right, or you become part of what's wrong. We chose to stand up, but you risked your relationship with the network for someone you barely knew." Dean was quiet, looking at hills beyond his pool. "Tommy, my father taught me something. How you treat people when you don't have to treat them well tells you everything about who you really are. We had power that night to help you or hurt you. That's not choice, that's responsibility." The Christmas special became legendary in television circles, studied in broadcast journalism courses as example of how entertainment could elevate rather than degrade public discourse. But for those there that night, witnessing Dean Martin and Frank Sinatra's quiet acts of courage, it represented something simpler and more profound. It reminded everyone that in business built on artifice and calculation, authenticity was the rarest and most powerful currency. That kindness wasn't weakness, but strength. That sometimes the most important gift you can give someone isn't fame or money, but dignity. Dean Martin and Frank Sinatra gave Tommy Nakamura and 20 million American viewers that gift on Christmas night, 1965. And in doing so, they reminded an entire industry that entertainment was most powerful when it served humanity, rather than exploiting it. The lesson of that Christmas special wasn't about television or celebrity, or even racial tolerance, though it encompassed all those things. It was about the choice every person faces when given power over another human being. The choice between kindness and cruelty, between lifting people up and tearing them down, between seeing others as fully human or reducing them to stereotypes for amusement. Dean Martin and Frank Sinatra made their choice that night in front of 20 million people. And in doing so, they proved that sometimes the greatest Christmas miracle isn't what you receive, but what you refuse to take away from someone else.